It's a good afternoon from everyone here at Ferguson Park TV, your community channel committed to collective and creative change. Coming up next for you, we have the latest instalment of Ferguson Focus, brought to you this week by special guest host and community activist Terry McTernan.
This is your life.
Good afternoon and welcome to this week's episode of Ferguson Focus, where we actively connect creativity and community. My name's Terry McTernan and some viewers might recognise me as the current chairperson of Ferguson Community Council. I'm also the project lead of its environmental subsidiary, Darkwood Crew. What you might not know, however, is that I'm also in my fourth and final year at the University of Glasgow studying community learning and development. So, with all of this in mind, today's show will focus on, explore and discuss the important role that the arts has to play in community development and community regeneration more broadly. We'll be joined by Mandy McIntosh, a well-respected and established community artist who herself comes from a working class background, where we will discuss two of her initiatives which have complemented the community-led regeneration of Ferguson Park over recent years. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by an incredible guest this afternoon who has been at the forefront of a plethora of community-based art initiatives, Mandy McIntosh. Hi, Mandy. Mandy's an artist with roots in the working class, and she's well known for creating accessible art that speaks directly to communities just like ours here in Ferguson Park. Our projects like The Slug in the Bottle and Tailor the Figi Flood have been instrumental in reshaping public spaces and engaging residents in powerful creative ways, connecting global issues to local contexts. Welcome to Ferguson Focus, Mandy.
I'm really delighted to be here, back in Ferguson again.
Super, where it's at apparently. No, it really is great to see you again, Mandy, and to have you on the show really. I feel obliged, however, to preface our interview, our chat this afternoon by admitting, despite being a sceptic when it comes to arts and its role in community development, I've been absolutely fascinated over recent years by your ability to really tune into what's artistically important to working class people in particular. And I don't know, I've watched how that translates into their understanding and their appreciation of art, and it kind of takes it away from that elitist vibe that seems to exist, particularly within working class communities.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's great that you've observed that, and just as you're speaking, I can actually remember the first time I met you. Was at an arts activity, and I remember you coming in, and I can just remember the scepticism. Sure. I can remember that you were like, who's she, what's she doing here, what's this all about?
Well, I think the reasons for that, because I've had loads of time to reflect, and I must say I'm a new convert to the world of arts, let me tell you. I think it was my own lived experience. I too held that idea that art was elitist, it was about Mona Lisa paintings, it was about sculptures kind of reminiscent of our rich cultural history and stuff like that. But I now appreciate that art is what you choose it to be.
Art is what you choose it to be, exactly. It's as democratic as you want it to be, and I think that once you understand that and once that's kind of given to you as a person, because if you think about it, you first encounter art in school, don't you?
Sure.
And what you're kind of learning in school is technique.
Yeah.
You learn how to draw, or you learn to kind of paint, or you learn how to make something out of clay, but you don't learn how to think about art. Unless you go through and do like higher or something like that, and you maybe write a wee dissertation or write an essay about it.
Sure.
Otherwise, you're not really given the chance to have kind of like critical thinking around it.
I think you're absolutely right, and again, for me, Ferguson Park's been a huge regeneration project for several decades now, and certainly there was a growing feeling within the community that things were being done to it. And I suppose from a personal perspective, art for me was something that was done to me. It wasn't something that I was encouraged to be participant in. Certainly wasn't something that I would have flown the flag as fully understanding what art was. So I think that's what I found fascinating about yourself. Some of your projects, Slug and Bottle, the sculpture there, and more, I say again, more locally, the Tale of the Figi Flood, they really captured the essence for me of what community arts is about. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of that though, can we just very quickly give our viewers at home a wee taste of some of your fantastic work?
Absolutely.
If you're from the west of Scotland, you will undoubtedly be familiar with the phrase, "Gi's a slug of your ginger." But do you know where it originates from? And would you be surprised to learn that it all began in Paisley in 1928, when May Donoghue found a decomposed slug in her ginger beer bottle in the Tally Cafe on Wellmeadow Street. After suffering shock and illness, she took legal action, not against the cafe owner, but the manufacturer, Paisley's David Stevenson. The case, which lasted 4 years, went all the way to the House of Lords, and in 1932 May won, setting a legal precedent for consumer rights worldwide today. Nowadays, a plaque marks the location of the Tally Cafe, and a sculpture by Mandy commemorates May Donoghue's one-woman struggle, forever linking Paisley to this landmark legal case. The Tale of the Figi Flood recounts the devastating flooding episode that struck Fergusley Park in December 1994, when relentless rainfall caused the Candron Burn to overflow, flooding homes, businesses and the very fabric of the community. The destruction was severe, leaving many displaced and causing extensive damage to property and infrastructure. Since that fateful event, Fergusley Park has experienced repeated, albeit less devastating, instances of flooding. These events have underscored the ongoing vulnerability of the community to the impacts of climate change and environmental challenges. The recurring floods serve as poignant reminders of the fragile relationship between communities and their surrounding environments. In response to this, almost 30 years later, the Tale of the Figi Flood was not only a reimagining of this tragic event, but also a powerful climate change themed performance. Led by artist-in-residence Mandy, the project brought together residents, artists and school children to create costumes, puppets and artwork that reflected both the history of the flood and its relevance to the climate crisis we face today. The community's participation in making costumes and visual elements connected the personal and collective experiences of the flood with broader global concerns. Through the use of sustainable materials, recycled elements and climate-conscious practices, the performance symbolised how local histories and environmental activism can intersect. The project celebrated not only the resilience of Fergusley Park residents, but also their agency in addressing the urgent issue of climate change, creating a lasting impression of both reflection and action. Well, I hope that gives you a wee flavour of some of the fantastic work Mandy's been responsible for. And I have a lived experience of your art as well, Mandy. And I suppose more broadly, I'd like to start by asking you, what do you think, how do you feel arts has a role to play in community development and regeneration more broadly?
The first point I'd really like to make about that, right, is to do with perceptions, because if you think about it, and if you think about the community arts, that was a kind of form of indigenous art within a community that might not have been perceived as art.
Sure.
So if you think about the work of someone like, you know, Margaret Canning and making things and creating costumes and creating kind of props and stuff like that for community work back in the kind of like 70s and 80s and 90s, probably workshops that you would have lived
I came through the Maggie Canning
absolutely,
scheme. Yep,
absolutely. So she's actually a sculptural practitioner. You look at her like that. I was blown away by Margaret's skill, right?
Yeah.
And so what I think some of the thing that I do is like trying to understand or trying to kind of platform the talent that already exists in a community and to give it its place and to actually frame it and understand it as art making.
Sure.
So community arts has kind of suffered historically as a kind of a sort of viewed as a sort of degraded art form.
Sure. Whereas
it needs to be elevated and brought to the fore, and the skill that already exists within a community needs to be brought to the fore. So in terms of regeneration, that's the primary I would say the primary task is to raise the consciousness around what is already there, what exists already, and to build the confidence among people that they have these abilities already.
Absolutely, and if you look at the space, place and community the kind of policy for the Scottish Government speaks very fluently. Number one principle, the community are the experts.
Yes.
So it shows you the kind of theoretical concepts that overlap some of that very creative stuff that you do are responsible for as an artist, and shows the, if you like, the kind of the transient nature between community development and art.
Absolutely. And art is a form of, like, one of the things that I would sort of talk about is influences on me in terms of how I make work and how I approach things. And someone that I was really influenced by back in the day was a woman called Cathy McCormack, who wrote The Wee Yellow Butterfly. It's like a really seminal text in community development. But one of the first things that she did was to use art and performance and costume making to talk about damp in housing in Easterhouse.
Sure.
And she spoke really eloquently about how vital and effective that was in terms of communicating the conditions or the problem to other members of the community, to use drama and comedy and costume and pantomime. So pantomime, for example, to me feels like an intrinsically working class art form.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, the Tales of the Figgy Flood really kind of sits within that kind of art form.
Yeah.
You know, working class dialogue, fun, you know,
Sure.
camp. The art is intrinsically about communication and about storytelling,
Sure.
telling a story. And I mean, the thing is about Ferguson Park is that there are so many phenomenal storytellers in this community. And in a way, and I think I said this to you already, something like The Tale of the Figgy Flood wrote itself.
Can you take me through the process there? I mean, did that start off, for example, did you know right from the first kick of the ball that was going to be a tantamount to a theatre production? Or was it a let's start off and let's see where this goes? How did you approach that?
Margaret Canning was from the get-go. Margaret Canning was a really strong participant. She came from the beginning. And she talked a lot about the play schemes, and that's when I kind of realised actually she talked about kind of performing and performances and all that, and that's when I realised actually we've got a really good performer here and a really good storyteller, and we can marry it up and we can do puppetry and we can do live performance and do all of that together. So it was really the desire to make a drama was there, but it really came to life with someone like Margaret Canning turning up and Michael, her son.
So what I'm hearing you saying there is it's local participation which essentially helps shape and mould the end outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I've already been working here for 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. I'm already kind of really familiar with some of the histories and some of the narratives and some of the events that affected the community.
Yep.
And so it's like a perfect storm where you go, right, I've got 6 months to make an art project, there's all this incredible material, and then there's Margaret Canning, and so yeah, things start to kind of do that.
For me, both The Slug in the Bottle and the Tale of the Figgy Flood, I think why I've chosen both to kind of discuss this afternoon is because they absolutely are local context with global challenges. Maid O'Donoghue set the precedent for legislation. The Tale of the Figgy Flood, if you like, the whole kind of climate change emergency that we're currently facing. So for me, again, from a community development perspective, that's not something that I would have previously associated with the arts. For me, the arts was something that, yeah, we spoke before, has elitist kind of connotations, yes, but it's almost kind of, if you like, therapeutic, maybe, yes, maybe overindulgent to a certain, yes, degree, yeah, certainly at a community grassroots level. Yeah. So to see that actually transposed, yeah, into that, oh no, this is reflective, yes, of a global challenge that, yes, our community doesn't have the consciousness to connect, yes, to. For me, that was really important. As somebody who's involved in the Reduce, Reuse, Recycle, yeah, Ferguson initiative, for example, we are already trying to make climate change relevant to local need with a broader view of meeting those needs in a dignified and sustainable way, and to have an arts project running in the background completely separate to us, yes, and to have that level of coordination, it makes me question as a practitioner, what could we have achieved had we actually coordinated it?
Yeah, had we collaborated?
Aye, absolutely. So, whereas back then I would have still thought, that's, as a practitioner, that's not my skill set. Is that a big part of the problem, I suppose I'm asking?
Yes, that's a really good point. And it's something that I think about a lot and talk about. I think we need to do more kind of training more thinking, more sharing of methodologies and practice, creative practices. That's why something like this is really, really good. And there's so there's two things that you're kind of mentioning that I think are really important to talk about, right? One thing is, what is the purpose of art, right? And I think predominantly in communities, what I see is art is coming in to make work with people in a way, and the therapeutic model is to take your mind off things. Oh, your life's terrible, come on, we'll do some art. Sure. And you'll feel better. Whereas I think the purpose of making art with communities is not necessarily to make people feel better, but to make people feel part of something and to make people feel that they have a political voice and they can be politically active. Right, so that's one thing. The other thing to talk about, right, and in terms of recycling and all of that stuff, and this is really sitting within what you're talking about, is material and expense, right? And so Margaret Cannon comes in and she's like, oh, don't buy all that, oh no, don't waste money on all that, we'll get newspaper, we'll get wallpaper paste, we'll get old bottles, and we'll make puppets. She taught me. Sure. Margaret Cannon showed me how to make stuff with paper mache and all that. And you know, I'm the so-called artist and Margaret's the participant, but actually it was very clear to me, and it always is, that it's an equitable relationship.
I completely agree, and I suppose the question I would ask in response to that, and keeping with Freirean principles, to me that's where the transient nature of community development and the arts lies. It's that popular educational approach. It's truly dialectic in nature. It's two-way. We're all learning at the same time. And for what I found fascinating about your ability, and I suppose I touched on it at the top of the kind of show, is you've genuinely, truly listened and tuned into how people. I mean, that was 30 years ago, the Figgy flood.
Still very relevant.
Oh, absolutely. But you weren't here 30 years ago.
No, I wasn't.
And yet you were able to come and really capture the essence of the genuine feelings that existed. I lived through, I was 14 years old. I remember it prevalently. Perhaps one of the most difficult experiences ever in my life. So to see it regurgitated, reinvented, but shaped as if you like, something to be celebrated rather than to be remembered with such kind of negativity.
Well, what was celebrated was the community response, right? And so when I first heard about the Figgy flood, it was in the pensioners. It was hearing people talk about it, and it was hearing people talk about it in terms of the funny things that happened, but also the tragic things that happened, but mainly how the community came together to help each other. And you hear something like that and you're like, that's phenomenal, that's so powerful. And so I guess what you're celebrating in something like the Tale of the Figgy flood was the community response, how galvanised the community were in terms of we all need to help each other.
Sure. Looking more specifically at the slug in the bottle, how does something like that come about? I mean, how did you? You're a lassie for Springburn, for example. How do you come across a story like that?
So I was working with the NHS at the time, right? I was in Paisley, and I don't think I had heard of the snail in the bottle. It was to do with the duty of care. So suddenly I was in a context where the duty of care was really prominent and really like a guideline. This isn't about consumerism. This is actually about your care of another person, your duty, the welfare of others. And then when I looked at it more, I was like, why does everybody go on about the snail? The snail, the snail, the snail? How is nobody talking about the wee woman that actually drank the ginger? And what happened to her and her story? And she was actually so when I looked at her story and her biography, she was from poverty, she was a single mum, she'd lost children in childbirth. And that happened to her, and nobody gave a shit about it.
Sure. We see the sculptures in Paisley. We see bald men. We see there are no female sculptures, for example, that I can recall. And now we have a female sculpture, but it doesn't follow the same format. No. Big black bronze outfit outside the town hall. It's much more accessible. It's much more touchy-feely. You can literally touch and feel it.
Exactly.
What was the rationale behind that?
So the rationale behind that was exactly that. Well, first, so I was like, actually, I'd never made a sculpture before, but I was going, well, I would like to make a sculpture here. And so the more I thought about it, and also probably because I wasn't coming from the traditional classic sculptural background, I was like, the only way that I can really make a sculpture is in relation to myself. But apart from all that, I was like, I need to work at this scale. And when I started working at that scale, I was like, this is really interesting because You can make eye contact with her, you can look at her, and you can touch her.
And I suppose what you're saying overall there is that art's not just about making something beautiful. It's not just about the aesthetic. It's about the bringing folks together, the shared experiences, shared skills, shared stories, life events, for example. It's all something that as human beings we can all really relate to. And I suppose bringing that back to a community development lens, that's the platform in which any community development is kind of built upon, those relationships. Cormac Russell, a theorist, for example, speaks about them being the building blocks of sustainable community development. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
What advice would you give an aspiring community development practitioner like myself if I was looking to perhaps use the arts as part of my practice when I know, for example, I am lacking in the skill set to do so, or I certainly have a frame of mind that, oh, that's not where my skill set lies, I'm not sure if I have the confidence to do that?
That's a really good question. So first of all, I would say have confidence in your own abilities, and have confidence in your own sensibilities and aesthetic sort of ideas, right? And then just find people that you can work with, you know? Find artists. If you like, I don't have the skill set, go and find someone who does and talk to them and bring them in. But I would say look at the history, look at the radical history of art and politics, and use that as your basis, as your starting point.
Well, that's as part of this exercise. That's something that I've had a kind of epiphany moment. But we're surrounded by art. I think I'm really intrigued by a point that you made there, though, in terms of the relevance. Again, I spoke earlier about how I felt art was something that was done to me, and everything that you've said there really encapsulates that. It's about that dialectic approach. It's about it's an evolving, it's a natural, organically evolving type thing. It's not prescribed right from the first kick of the ball. It's about allowing folks to find their way. And I suppose what you're in effect saying is it needs to be relevant, but it needs to be led by the community themselves in any community arts.
We want this, we want it to look like this. Being represented is a form of participation.
Sure. Mandy, I could sit here and I could talk to you absolutely all afternoon. Thank you so much for
You're
coming on
welcome. What a
Focus.
brilliant conversation.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So thanks very much as well to the viewers at home. As you can see, art is all around us. It influences our lives every minute of every day. Sometimes we just fail to recognise it. Don't forget to tune in to Ferguson Focus next week. Goodbye.
This is your life.